I was carrying a platter of bruschetta when I saw Renee crouch down to Lily's level, both hands around a plastic cup the color of watermelon, her smile doing the thing it always did, arriving a half-second too late, like a translation. Lily's fingers closed around the cup. Renee's eyes stayed on Lily's face in the way you watch something you've been waiting a long time to see. And it was the quality of the waiting in her expression, that moved my feet before my mind had formed a single word. This is the part I come back to. I already know the ending. I'm telling you how I got there. I set the platter on the nearest flat surface, which happened to be Craig's forearm, and said, "Lily, your shoelace." It wasn't untied. She looked down anyway, the way 8-year-olds do when an adult states a fact, and I crouched beside her and put Lily's pink cup next to Craig's elbow and picked up Craig's identical untouched cup, same plastic, same clear lid, same volume of pale orange liquid, and handed it to Lily and said, "Here, careful." I was upright again in 4 seconds. Nobody looked at us. The party moved around us the way parties do, full of itself, loud with family noise, children crossing the yard in the dark at the edges of the Edison, lights I'd strung from the fence posts. Lily took a long pull from the cup and said it tastes like peach and ran toward the yard. I picked up the bruschetta platter and did not look at Renee. Luke died on a Tuesday in February. He was 36. I was upstairs in my home office finishing a load calculation for a parking structure in Dublin, Ohio, the city's, not Ireland's, and he was in the kitchen, and then he wasn't alive anymore. The coffee maker was still running when I came downstairs. The cardiologist used the phrase sudden cardiac event, which is the medical system's way of saying there was no warning, and there is nothing you could have done, which I understood intellectually, and which did not prevent me from replaying the 22 minutes between the last time I heard him moving around and the moment I found him on the linoleum. Lily was at school. That's the thing I'm grateful for in the architecture of that morning. She was at school, and I had 20 minutes to be whatever I needed to be before I had to become a mother again. Grief, I found, makes you permeable. Your edges go soft. The ordinary administrative wall that separates you from other people, the one that lets you say no and I'll handle it, and actually I disagree, it dissolves, and things get through that you would otherwise have deflected. I know this now. I did not know it then, which is the whole problem. Renee was at the house within 4 hours of Luke's death. I don't know who called her. It may have been me. She brought a casserole. She stayed. She came back the next day with more food and opinions about the order of operations for the death certificate. She came back the day after that. Over the weeks that followed, she became a structural presence in my life in the way that, when you are drowning, a ladder dropped into the water feels like salvation before it occurs to you to ask who dropped it and why. Luke and Renee had not been close. He'd mentioned it the way he mentioned things that were complicated briefly, with a kind of careful neutrality, a couple of times in our 12 years. She wanted things from him when they were young, he'd said once. I never asked what things. It seemed like history. It wasn't history. The word I would use later, writing notes to myself in a document I kept in a folder on an encrypted drive, was positioned. Renee positioned herself. It takes patience to do that, real patience, the kind that requires a long view and a clear objective, and the discipline not to move too fast. She was there for the meals and the logistics and the bureaucratic horror of the first weeks. She was there for the school forms Lily needed when she fell behind, for the medication refills when I forgot, for the grocery runs when I stood in the cereal aisle for 11 minutes and had to leave. She expressed gentle concern about Lily's stability and about whether I was in a position to provide what Lily needed. And she said it the way you'd say it if you were caring, if the concern were real. And I heard it as caring because I was permeable and she was there and I was very, very tired. She brought documents for me to sign twice. I signed them. That's the sentence I have to write plainly. I signed them. I don't remember signing the second one clearly. It was November, 5 months after Luke died, and I was not fully present in my own kitchen in the way that I had not been fully present in my own life since February. My handwriting on that document, which I would look at later, was visibly worse than mine, shaky in the line pressure, the letters slightly wrong in their proportions, the signature of someone who was not all the way there. I found the document 8 months later when I was looking for Lily's vaccination records for her school physical. It was in a manila folder in the third drawer of the filing cabinet, behind the car insurance. Power of attorney, Durable, Ohio. My name at the top. Several pages of language I had not read when I signed it. Clause 14b on page 4. In the event of the principal's incapacitation, guardianship of any minor children shall transfer to the designated agent as identified in Schedule A. Schedule A was a single page. It had Renee Smith's name on it. I stood at the filing cabinet for a long time. Then I sat on the kitchen floor, which I do not usually do, and read the whole document twice. Then I made coffee and opened my laptop and started looking at the joint account Luke and I had kept for household expenses, which Renee had helped me manage in the months after his death because I'd had trouble tracking things, and she'd offered, and I had let her because I was permeable and she was there. 14 transfers over 9 months. The amounts ranged from $1,200 to $6,800. The descriptions read household support and family assistance, and once, inexplicably, memorial coordination. Total, $43,800. I looked at the number for a while. I thought about how it compared to the estate. I thought about Luke's life insurance, which had been substantial because he was a structural engineer, and we had a child, and we were not careless people. I thought about how long Renee had been planning this. 9 months of transfers meant she had started within weeks of the funeral. The power of attorney meant she had a mechanism for the child. The financial transfers meant she was already moving the money. And the party. The party, I was beginning to understand, meant she was done waiting. At 7:51 p.m., Craig Smith made a sound I had never heard a person make. It was wet and rattling and wrong, and the room changed around it the way rooms change when something that isn't supposed to happen begins happening in front of everyone. I was across the room. I watched Renee's face. There was a 3-second window in which her expression did nothing. Not concern, not surprise. Nothing, a stillness that was not the stillness of shock but the stillness of a calculation running. Then her eyes moved to Lily, who was standing near the back door eating a piece of bruschetta, entirely fine, entirely herself, her inhaler clipped to her belt like always. Renee's eyes found no symptoms in Lily. I watched her register this. I watched something reorganize behind her face. And then the concerned sister-in-law mask came back on, and she was moving toward Craig and calling his name, and someone was dialing 911, and the room filled with the ordinary chaos of an emergency. I went to the kitchen. Lily's original cup, the pink one, was where I'd left it by Craig's elbow. Craig had moved it when he reached for the table. It had about a third of its contents remaining. I got a mason jar from the cabinet where I'd put the canning supplies because this kitchen had shelves I'd built myself. I knew where everything was, and I put the remaining liquid in the mason jar and sealed it and labeled it with a piece of masking tape from the junk drawer. Party, 10:14, tilde 7, 50 p.m. Cup A, then I put it behind the lasagna in the refrigerator. My hands did not shake. I have thought about this later, whether the stillness of my hands meant something about who I am, or whether it just meant that I had already, on some level that outran my conscious reasoning, understood what had happened and moved into the operational space that follows understanding. I don't know. I'm a structural engineer. I know how to assess a failure while it is still failing. Maybe it's that. Craig went to the hospital. Renee rode in the ambulance. The party unwound. I helped people find their coats and said the things you say, and eventually the house was empty and Lily was asleep with her hair still in its party braid, and I sat in the kitchen and looked at the refrigerator. Meridian Analytical Services opened at 8 in the morning. I called at 8:30. The intake coordinator's name was Theo, and he walked me through chain of custody documentation without asking me why I had a mason jar of beverage from a party sealed with masking tape. He did not need to ask. People call Meridian for reasons. Dr. Sylvia Miller called me 12 days later. She had the cadence of someone who chooses words carefully and wants to make sure they land. She said the sample contained a compound consistent with a sedative hypnotic class substance, and she said the concentration was significant, and she said, with a particular deliberateness, potentially fatal. Then she paused. Then she said, particularly in a patient with a respiratory condition. Then she waited to see if I understood. Lily's asthma, her small lungs, her inhaler clipped to her belt. I said, I understand. Dr. Miller said she would prepare a formal report and asked if I was working with an attorney. I was. Sarah Parton had helped me update my will the previous spring, 6 weeks after Luke died, and she had called twice in the month since to check on me, not in a billable way, just in the way of someone who does this work for 24 years and knows what grief looks like from the outside. She was the first person I showed the bank records to. I sat in her office on a Tuesday morning in October and laid the printed spreadsheet on her desk and watched her go quiet. She read it for a long time. Then she picked up the power of attorney and read that. Then she set both down and looked at me and said, in the voice of someone who has done the math and arrived at an answer she doesn't like, the power of attorney is voidable on grounds of incapacity at the time of signing. I'm filing to vacate it today. She also told me about the forensic accountant she worked with, and about what $43,800 in documented transfers with her name on them meant, legally. The cousin Jess was 22 and had been hiding in my pantry at the party texting someone her mother didn't approve of. She'd started a voice memo earlier in the evening for some other purpose and forgotten to stop it. When I called her, 3 weeks after the party, and asked whether she had recorded anything that night, there was a long silence and then she said, I don't know if it's anything. It was 14 seconds. She had been 2 feet away from Renee when Renee handed Lily the cup. I had Sarah send it to a forensic audio analyst, and what came back confirmed what it had sounded like. Drink all of it, okay? I made it especially for you, don't share. 14 seconds. It was not by itself enough, but it was not nothing. Detective Sandra Lane worked crimes against persons and had for 9 of her 16 years. She asked me to explain everything twice. She asked about the toxicology report and about the bank records and about the power of attorney and about the audio. Then she leaned back and asked about the moment at the party. Why did you switch the cups before you had certainty? I thought about how to answer this. I thought about Renee crouching down to Lily's level, both hands on the pink cup, the quality of the waiting in her expression. I had a feeling, I said, the kind I should have trusted 14 months earlier. Detective Lane wrote something in her notebook. She did not ask me to elaborate. I had filed copies of everything in 3 separate locations before I walked into the police department. The drive, the cloud, a physical folder in Sarah's office. This is not paranoia. This is how you document load-bearing evidence. You do not keep it in one place. You do not assume the structure is sound until you have verified the redundancy. Renee came to the house 11 days after the party. It was a Sunday afternoon. She was wearing a beige cardigan and soft makeup, and she was carrying a container of soup, and she looked the way she had always looked at my door, polished in a way that suggested effort assembled, the whole presentation calibrated for the role. Concerned relative, devoted sister-in-law, woman who only wanted to help. She stepped inside when I opened the door, and her eyes moved around the house the way they had at the party, and at every other visit, taking inventory, assessing the layout, cataloging what was hers by right of some calculus I had never been invited to understand. The eyes of someone who has decided that a thing belongs to her and is patiently waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She asked how Lily was doing. She asked how I was doing. She said she'd been thinking about consistency for Lily, about how children needed stability after loss, about how she and Craig would be available, more than available, really, to provide that if I ever needed it. She built the sentence with the careful construction she always brought to this particular subject. The architecture of a woman who has rehearsed the offer and knows how to make it sound like generosity. I looked at her. 14 months of positioning, of patience, of meals and logistics and documents and concern, of transfers and clauses and a pink cup at a party, all of it load-bearing, all of it pointing in the same direction. I said, I have a family law attorney, a forensic accountant, and a recording of your voice. The warmth left her face. It did not happen slowly. It drained, like water through a hole, and what was underneath it was nothing I needed to name. She said, You can't prove anything." I said, "I already did." She stood there for a moment with the soup container in her hands. Then she left. I closed the door and listened to her car back out of the driveway, and I stood in my own front hallway, in my house with its slightly crooked fence section, and its Edison lights and its hardwood I'd sanded and finished myself, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Sarah texted me on a Thursday morning. The county had moved. Detective Lane had what she needed. I was at the community center with Lily, who was in a Saturday baking class. She'd been begging since September, and I'd signed her up, and we went every week while I drank bad coffee in a plastic chair and watched through the window. She was at the stainless counter with her instructor and another kid learning to fold pastry dough, her brow furrowed with the specific concentration she brought to anything she took seriously, which was most things. Her inhaler was clipped to her belt. She had flour on her left forearm. I read the text. I put the phone in my pocket. I looked at my daughter through the window. She had Luke's hands. I hadn't noticed it until recently. The way she held things, the deliberateness of her grip, the way her fingers knew what they were doing even when she was still learning. He used to make Sunday breakfast. He would have loved watching her do this. He would have stood exactly where I was standing, and he would have been so pleased with her. I thought about how close it came. I thought about a pink cup and a crowded room and the 14 seconds in Jess's voice memo and a mason jar behind the lasagna. I thought about the afternoon. I sat on the kitchen floor and read Clause 14b and understood, for the first time, that I was not paranoid, that the thing I had been half-sensing for 14 months had been real and had been building toward something and had almost arrived. The instructor said something and Lily laughed. It was Luke's laugh, exactly, short, real, catching you off guard. She went back to the dough, serious again. Lily is 8. Her asthma is stable and she wears her inhaler like a sheriff's badge and she is not afraid of it. She wants to learn to make everything, croissants, fresh pasta, bread, things that require patience and repetition and the willingness to fail several times before you get it. We make things together in the kitchen on Saturday mornings, the two of us, flour on the counter, something good in the oven. I watch her with the specific attention of someone who understands what almost happened and has made a private decision never to look away. She doesn't know. I will decide someday how much of it to tell her and when. Right now she knows that her father died when she was 7 and that she misses him and that her mother is always there. That is enough for now. I switched the cups. That's all I did. I saw the wrong thing in a woman's face and I switched the cups and I picked up the platter and I went back to my party and I waited and I documented everything and I built the case the way I build anything, from the load-bearing points out, with redundancy, with verification, with the patience of someone who knows that a structure only holds if every joint is sound. The rest of it was already there, waiting to be found.